Spiritual reading this morning. I'm reading from a book called Broken Open, How Difficult Times Can Help Us Grow by Elizabeth Lesser, who is one of the co-founders of the Omega Institute, which is an institute for really spiritual learning and growth. They do lots of retreats and workshops and so forth. So she says this: had I never stumbled down the mountain of my ideals, had my ego not been humbled by loss, and my heart not broken open by pain, I would not have discovered the secret treasure that lies waiting for each one of us at the bottom of our most difficult times. It is true. There is meaning hidden in the small changes of everyday life, and wisdom to be found in the shards of your most broken moments. At the end of a dark night of the soul is the beginning of a new life. But it's hard to accept that when you're in pain. And it's tiresome to hear about it from someone who's not.
Scripture lesson this morning is Matthew 5, 1 through 10. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountainside, and after he sat down and the disciples had gathered around, Jesus began to teach them. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit, the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are those who are mourning, they will be consoled. Blessed are those who are gentle, they will inherit the land. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, they will have their fill. Blessed are those who show mercy to others, they will be shown mercy. Blessed are those whose hearts are clean, they will see God. Blessed are those who work for peace, they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of their struggle for justice. The kingdom of heaven is theirs.
Would you pray with me? Gracious Spirit, focus our minds and our hearts, our souls on your presence, within and around, that we might see through you our own depth, our own dimension, our own wisdom, the wholeness and the wonder of our lives. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with light and grace. Amen. So, the reading that Teresa just did is that little litany. It's called the Beatitudes. It talks about who's blessed. And all of those folks in that litany really were not seen as people who were blessed in that day and age. In ancient times, if you were blessed, it was because God supposedly was rewarding you, right? Because you were a good person, you were a righteous person, you were a devout person, you were doing something right. And so God moved, so they believed, to bless you at the time. And if you weren't being blessed, if you were sick, if your crops were failing, if your goat died, it was clearly, they believed, because you screwed up. Blessing back in ancient times was all about a reward system. We've come past that. And so we're looking at blessing in a different way now. We've talked about blessing as being the lifeblood throbbing through the universe. It's available for all of us at all times, no matter what. So, and I believe that Jesus understood that was within his theology, that all people were unconditionally loved by God, and therefore able to experience that blessing of being the beloved. If you remember Jan Richardson, the very first, I don't know how you're going to remember, but the very first reading I did in the beginning of this series was Begin with Being Beloved, I believe, was the name of the, I can never remember this. Beloved is where we begin. I always get it backwards. It was the name of her kind of poem, her blessing. Beloved is where we begin. And we talked about the concept that, for her, she said, if you're going to go on a journey into the wilderness, if you're going into challenging times, into uncertainty and struggle and confusion and maybe some fear, if there's a difficult time in front of you, she said, make sure you begin with remembering, really remembering and knowing to the core of your being that you are beloved of the divine presence that is in all things. To begin there. And it changes how we feel about our journeys into difficult times. So what if we look at the Beatitudes through that lens? Through the concept that all of those folks that Jesus is talking about are beloved and blessed. I think it might change the way the litany goes a little bit, but I also think that I'm maintaining the integrity of the piece. But it might say, even those who are poor in spirit are beloved and blessed. Even those who are in mourning are beloved and blessed. Even those who are struggling for justice are beloved and blessed. Even those who are persecuted are beloved and blessed. You see how that, to me, that fills it out. To me, that makes sense. It says, it's not that, only the good people are blessed. Everybody, even in the midst of challenge, there is blessing in it. So if we were to change that a little bit to our times, our culture, our society, how might we write that litany today? And maybe it would be, even those who are down and depressed are beloved and blessed. Even those, your turn, who are homeless are beloved and blessed. Connie.
Who are living with racial prejudice.
Even those who are living with racial prejudice are beloved and blessed. Even those who are bullied. Even those who have mental illness. Even those who are addicts. Even those who have cancer. Even those, pick a struggle, even those from broken homes are beloved and blessed. Even those contemplating suicide are beloved and blessed. Even those doing the bullying are beloved and blessed. Even those incarcerated are beloved and blessed. Even those that we can't stand are beloved and blessed. It's something to remember, isn't it? It's hard sometimes because in a way we'd like to just continue that ancient pattern. Well, clearly all of those people that we think are not good people should not be beloved and blessed. But the truth is, and the truth that Jesus taught is they are. That we are all beloved and blessed. And the challenge, the title of this sermon was that to be the blessing of challenging times. So to sort of bring us back to that, it may feel like we're not beloved and blessed in the midst of a challenging time. It may feel like the universe is against us, and it may be hard to see any sort of silver lining whatsoever when we're going through those times. And even Elizabeth Lesser said, gosh, it's hard to get to the treasure underneath all of this crap that we're going through. And it's tiresome to listen to other people talk about it when they're not in the midst of it. So forgive me if I'm being tiresome to some of you today. But I think it's an important part of blessing to remember that it's always there as the lifeblood of the universe, even in our crappiest times. Sometimes it takes a new perspective to start to see it. So the large communities are communities, there's a couple different communities around the world. They're communities for folks with disabilities, moderate to severe disabilities. And it's a different structure than maybe just a group home, because they actually live with their caregivers. They live with their assistants. So they're together all the time. And they're like family. They live together. And the assistants come from all over the world. They come for short periods of time. They may come for 6 months. They may come to study. They may come for many years. They may stay. Henry Nouwen, who was a priest, talks about his time at Large Daybreak in Canada. And one of the struggles of the residents there, the long-term residents, is that they have these assistants come and live with them and help them day in and day out. They eat with them, they bathe them, they take care of all of their needs, but they develop a family relationship, and then their assistants leave. And it's really, really hard to develop that close relationship, and then one after another, watch the folks leave to go back to their lives, or their work permit runs out, or whatever the case may be. Eventually, those folks tend to leave. So, Jean Venet, who developed and started the large communities, visited at Daybreak, where Henry Nouwen was, and he gathered all of the residents together. And he said, ask me whatever question you need to ask me. And one of the long-term residents there raised her hand and she said, why are people always leaving us? And he knew that she voiced, a pain that many of the long-term residents felt. And so he moved a little bit closer to her and he addressed her very gently and very compassionately. And he said, this is the most important question for you to ask. Because certainly this is your home. This is where you want to be well loved and well protected. And the folks who come here, you receive so much from them and you give so much to them. And you feel love from them. And so why would it be that you would feel such pain so often when they would depart? Why is it that you must think that someone who loves you, why would they leave you? And he had the attention of all of the residents, and they were listening very, very hard to this person that they felt understood them and knew what they were going through. And he said, your joy and your pain are a mission. He said, the people who come to you, with whom you share so much and develop such a deep bond, aren't really leaving you. You're sending them off. You're sending them back to their homes and their schools and their families with the love that you have lived together. And he said, I know it's hard and I know it's painful. But when you can think of it as your mission, perhaps it will help you to understand it in a different light so you can let them go while still maintaining and keeping all of the joy that you shared together. It's that kind of change in perspective that sometimes we need to find the treasure underneath the challenge. And it's not necessarily easy. Part of Jan Richardson's poem where she talks about being beloved and going out into the wilderness, she also says there's no promise that things are going to be easy, that there's not going to be danger or fear or dark times or hunger and thirst, all these wonderful metaphors. Life is tough. But sometimes a little change in perspective helps us to see things differently so we can get through. So we can see a little bit of light in the midst of the darkness. So Elizabeth Lesser tells a story in her book about Ram Dass. How many of you have heard of Ram Dass? Jerry, a couple, right? You and me are it, Jerry. No, Mike. Okay. So Ram Dass is actually a very, very well-known spiritual leader, kind of guru, meditation person. Very, very well-known for his insight, for his spiritual wisdom, brilliance. And Elizabeth tells a story about him. She kind of experiences him on two different levels. She experienced this wonderful, brilliant teacher and guide who was instrumental in her spiritual transformation. But then she also experienced him as he served on the board of the Omega Institute with her. And she found him to be the kind of person that does not like to depend on anyone else, who tends to retreat quickly when relationships get sticky, and who likes to run the show. So she said the first Ram Dass was, wonderful in her own spiritual life. The second Ram Dass infuriated her. And she was in the middle of one of these infuriating times with him, where they weren't really speaking, didn't see each other for a long period of time, maybe exchanged a very brief, curt email or two. But it was, a year or longer since they'd had any real connection. When he had a stroke, massive stroke, the kind of stroke that only 10% of people survive from. She heard from friends that his whole right side was completely paralyzed, that the doctors weren't sure if he would ever walk again, if he would ever speak again. A week before Ram Dass had his stroke, Elizabeth's father died of the same kind of stroke. So she was in the midst of grieving her father, plus she wasn't quite sure where this relationship was at with Ram Dass because they were in the middle of one of these infuriating times. So she didn't have any contact with him after the stroke for about a year. After a year, she finally went to visit him in his California home. And she walked up to the house and she saw him sitting in his wheelchair on the front porch. So looking very bent over and frail, and his right hand strapped to the rail of his wheelchair. His white hair going all over the place. But he looked up at her and in delight, he said, "Elizabeth!" And she said, tears just coursed down her face. And she said, "I'm home, dear," jokingly. And he said, "You are home. Welcome home." And she sat down and they talked, and she asked him all kinds of questions about his stroke and his recovery, and he had a really hard time speaking and gathering the words, and she found herself finishing his sentences very often. But after talking for quite a while, she said to him, "Ram Dass, I find you to be more human now. more of a real human and more of an eternal soul, both at the same time. And he choked up and he said, grace. He said, strong grace, fierce grace. Ego gone. Nothing else left. When ego leaves, you see yourself as you truly are. He wrote it a little better in a book about his experience. And I'd like to read this because I can't say it as well. For me to see the stroke as grace required a perceptual shift. It was a shift from taking the point of view of the ego to taking the point of view of the soul. What was changed through the stroke was my attachment to the ego. The stroke was unbearable to the ego, and so it pushed me into the soul level. Because when you bear the unbearable, something within you dies. My identity flipped over, and I said, so that's who I am. I'm a soul. I ended up where looking at the world from the soul level is my ordinary, everyday state. And that's grace. It's almost the definition of grace. And so that's why, although from the ego's perspective, the stroke is not much fun, from the soul's perspective, it's been a great learning opportunity. When you're secure in the soul, what's to fear? Since the stroke, I can say to you with an assurance I couldn't have felt before, that faith and love are stronger than any changes, stronger than aging, and I'm very sure stronger than death. I have to wonder how long it took him to get to that point. Because certainly at the beginning of the stroke there would be fear and there would be frustration and there would be pain and there would be anger and there would be sorrow and there would be grieving. How long did it take him to get to the point where he found the treasure under the challenge? He found the blessing in the challenge. And maybe it doesn't matter, but he finally got there. Sometimes it takes hindsight to be able to see the blessing in the challenges, to be able to look back and say, okay, I can learn something from this. It has given me depth and dimension and wisdom, like our paintings, like Jerry's painting. I had somebody say to me this week, said, you know, Kaye, it's really too bad you had to go through all you went through, but I'm kind of glad you did because now you understand. That's the treasure. That's the blessing underneath the challenge. Henry Nouwen says it this way. He says, we're willing to look back at our lives and say, I'm grateful to the good things that brought me to this place. But when we lift our cup to life, we must dare to say, I'm grateful for all that has happened and led me to this moment. This gratitude, which embraces all of our past, is what makes our life a true gift to others. Because this gratitude erases bitterness, resentments, regret, and revenge, as well as all jealousies and rivalries. It transforms our past into a fruitful gift for the future and makes our life, all of it, into a life that gives life. So one last little story. Rachel Raymond, who wrote My Grandfather's Blessings, tells of a ritual that she was taught by a Tibetan nun that she does every day. So she has a little bowl that sits in a special place in her house. And each morning after she awakens, she takes that bowl and she carries it to the sink and she turns on the water and she allows that bowl to fill up to the very brim. And while it's filling, she thinks about all of the things in her life. She thinks about her work and the people she's going to interact with during the day. And she thinks about her strengths and her limitations. She thinks about her struggles and the things that are bringing her joy. She thinks about her history and what's brought her to this moment. And she sees all of that as that water filling up the bowl. So that when she comes to the end, she has this bowl of everything in her life. That this is her portion of life. And she takes that bowl and very, very carefully, very slowly, without spilling a drop, walks it to this special place in her house. And she puts it in that special place. And then she asks it, basically, these are my words, to all of it, to be of service to life for her for the day. All of the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it to be of service in her life that day. Essentially consecrating it, making it holy and blessed, every bit of her life. And when she comes home at night, she takes that bowl and she dumps the water outside, returning it to the earth, places the bowl upside down in its special place to wait for the next day. But she said the act of that has reminded her that every single thing that has happened to her can be a part of how she's of service to the world in a compassionate, kind, caring, loving way. And she said somehow that ritual blurs the boundaries between the good times and the bad times, between the wounds and the successes or the joys. It blurs it all into just who we are, who we carry to the world that we can use to touch others. And in all of that, we find the blessing in the challenges. So it's for us to remember, almost on a daily basis, that we are beloved and blessed, no matter what we're going through in life. That the darkness gives depth and dimension to who we are, and dimension to who we are. And that all of that can be of service as we walk through our days. Amen.